Welcome to Agora Nexus with Atabai, where knowledge and awareness converge. Wisdom begins with curiosity. The unexamined life is not worth living.
Picture this, a place with its own government, its own flag, maybe even its own army, but if you go looking for it on most world maps, poof, it's not there. These aren't made-up lands from a fantasy novel, they're unrecognized states, and we're about to dive deep into their really strange and fascinating reality. This quote right here, it just nails the central paradox, doesn't it? It's a total geopolitical riddle. How can a place be real enough to need soldiers, but not real enough to legally be called a country? That's the big mystery we're going to try and solve today. So to really get our heads around this, we're going to look at three key examples. You can think of them as, geopolitical ghosts. They act like countries, they feel like countries to the people living there, but on the world stage, they're just stuck in this bizarre, undefined limbo. Right, so here are our three case studies, and you can see right away how different they are. First, you've got Transnistria, which is basically a little slice of the old Soviet Union that broke away from Moldova. Then there's Somaliland, a surprisingly stable democracy that's, on paper, still part of Somalia. And finally, Northern Cyprus, a place that's recognized as a country by only one other nation on the entire planet. So, the big question is, how do these places even manage to survive without any official recognition? Well, it turns out they kind of have a playbook. They usually follow one of two very different strategies to just stay afloat in this geopolitical gray area. And this slide lays out those two playbooks perfectly. On one hand, you have the patron state model. The strategy here is simple. Find a big, powerful friend and hold on for dear life. It's a lifeline, for sure, but it also makes you incredibly dependent. Then you have the other way, self-reliance. This is all about building everything you need from the ground up, creating your own stability and legitimacy from within. Let's dig into that patron model for a second. For Transnistria, Russia isn't just a friend, it's everything. Russia provides military protection, we're talking actual troops on the ground, and supplies the gas that literally keeps the lights on. The support is so complete that a referendum a while back showed most people there would rather just join Russia outright. The massive risk, of course, is that Transnistria's entire fate is tied to the political winds blowing in Moscow. Now let's flip that coin and look at Somaliland. With no powerful patron to lean on, it had no choice but to build a state from scratch. And honestly, it's done an incredible job. They've created stable institutions by mixing modern democracy with the traditional authority of clan elders. And get this, to make sure their elections are fair, they've used one of the world's most advanced voting systems with biometric iris scanning. It's just this remarkable symbol of their commitment to building a legitimate state, all by themselves. So, okay, we've talked about the high-level politics. But what's it actually like to live in a country that isn't really a country? How does this strange status affect the day-to-day lives of the millions of people who call these places home? Just try to imagine this for a second. Your entire nation, your passport, your whole identity, officially acknowledged by just one other country in the whole world. I mean, for the people of Northern Cyprus, this isn't some weird thought experiment. It's their reality. Turkey is their only diplomatic ally on the entire globe. And daily life can get, well, quirky. In Transnistria, you might go to the store and pay for your groceries with a plastic circle or maybe a plastic triangle. Yep, they mint their own currency, the Transnistrian ruble, out of composite materials. And it's a type of money that becomes completely worthless the second you step outside their unrecognized borders. Even something we take for granted, like booking a flight, becomes incredibly complicated. You want to fly to Northern Cyprus? Well, you can't. Not directly anyway. Because of international aviation laws, every single flight, no matter where it's coming from, has to legally touch down in Turkey first. It's a mandatory detour that's a direct result of its unrecognized status. In these isolated economies, power can get concentrated in some pretty wild ways. Take Transnistria, where one company called Sheriff is just everywhere. It owns the big supermarkets, the gas stations, the TV channels, and yeah, even the famous soccer team, FC Sheriff. It completely blurs the line between what's a corporation and what's the state itself. So this brings us to what is maybe the biggest question of all. Why? I mean, if these places have stable governments and functioning economies, why does the rest of the world just refuse to recognize them as actual countries? And here is the absolute key to the whole thing. Getting recognized has almost nothing to do with whether a place works like a country. It's not about having a police force or printing your own stamps. It is pretty much 100% about politics, history, and the messy, tangled web of international relations. The story of Northern Cyprus is a perfect example of this. Its existence today is rooted in a really long and painful history. After Cyprus got its independence in 1960, terrible tensions between Greek and Turkish Cypriots just boiled over, leading to years of violence, a coup, and then a military intervention by Turkey in 1974 that literally split the island in two. And that division? It's still frozen in time today. You see, every one of our case studies was born from a specific and still unresolved conflict. Transnistria was terrified of being absorbed into a Romanian-speaking Moldova. Somaliland said, "We're out," when the central government of Somalia just completely fell apart into chaos. And Northern Cyprus, well, that came from the violent partition of the island. These original conflicts are the political walls that are still blocking their path to getting global recognition. And it's so important to understand that these three places aren't just a few isolated oddities on the map. They're actually part of a much bigger and often totally overlooked global phenomenon. When you zoom out, the scale of this whole thing is kind of staggering. There are over 70 unrecognized or partially recognized territories scattered across the globe. Partially recognized just means at least one UN member says they're a country, like Northern Cyprus. Unrecognized means zero. Altogether, that's dozens and dozens of places living in this strange state of geopolitical limbo. And for the actual people living in these places, this is not some abstract political debate. It has massive, real-world consequences. It means you can't join the UN, you're completely cut off from major international loans you might need for development, your passport might be basically useless, and if you get into serious trouble when you're traveling, there's no embassy for you to call for help. So, when you put it all together, it leaves us with this one really fundamental question. What truly makes a country a country? Is it just having borders on a map and a government that works? Or is it something more intangible? Is it just about having everyone else agree that you exist? The answer, as it turns out, is nowhere near that simple. When you think of a powerful country, what's the first thing that comes to mind? For a lot of us, it's probably a strong army, right? But what if that strength comes at a staggering price? Today, we're going to explore the true cost of military power and the really radical choice some countries have made to live without it entirely. Let's dive in. Okay, let's just start with a number. Get ready for this. In just 1 year, that's 2015, the world spent this much on its militaries. That's nearly $1.7 trillion, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. I mean, it's a figure so vast, it's almost impossible to really wrap your head around. At a number like that, it just forces you to ask a bigger question. Beyond all the dollars and cents, what is the real cost of maintaining all the world's armed forces? Because it's not just about the money we spend, it's about the opportunities we lose. Right? So that massive number, it's not just some abstract statistic. It's the sum of countless decisions. See, every single dollar that goes into a tank or a fighter jet is a dollar that can't go into a school or a hospital or clean energy. It's a global trade-off. In economics, there's a name for this. It's called opportunity cost. And it's a pretty simple but powerful idea. Choosing one thing automatically means you're giving up the next best thing. So the big question is, what is the world giving up for that $1.7 trillion? This graphic right here puts that trade-off into incredibly sharp focus. That large circle you see, that's the whole shebang, the entire $1.7 trillion military budget. And all those smaller bubbles inside, well, that's the estimated annual cost to achieve some of the UN's most critical goals, like ending hunger or providing clean water for everyone. Let's just look at what this means, because this is where it gets kind of mind-blowing. According to the CIPRI analysis, the cost of ending extreme poverty and hunger is just a tiny slice of that military budget. The same thing goes for providing universal education. As you can see, we're not even talking about reallocating the whole budget, but just a fraction of it could solve some of the biggest challenges humanity has ever faced. Seeing that staggering opportunity cost, it really raises a radical question. What if a country just chose a totally different path? Well, it turns out some have. So let's look at the fascinating alternative. Nations that has opted out of the military system altogether. It might sound radical, but according to research from APRED, There are dozens of countries out there that function entirely without armed forces. It's a choice that directly challenges the conventional wisdom about how a nation is supposed to protect itself. The formal term for this is non-militarization, and it's not just a temporary thing. It is the permanent status of a country that has decided, both as a matter of policy and as a matter of law, that it just will not have a national military, period. And who are these countries? The list is surprisingly diverse. It includes nations in Central America like Costa Rica and Panama, European states like Iceland and Monaco, and island nations like Mauritius and Vanuatu. So this isn't just a quirk of one or two tiny states. It's a viable model for a whole range of different nations. Costa Rica is probably the most famous example. Back in 1949, they didn't just disband their army, they wrote its abolition directly into their constitution. And the language is totally unequivocal. The army as a permanent institution is abolished. An army abolished by law, a country dedicated to peace, it sounds simple, almost idyllic. But as with most things in geopolitics, the reality on the ground, well, it can be a little more complicated. So let's stick with Costa Rica, because its story reveals a much more complex picture. A 1990 report from a U.S. government agency dug into the reality behind the country's famous claim of having no military. And here is the core of the issue. On one side, you have the law, crystal clear. On the other side, you have the reality, a police force equipped with what most of us would consider military-grade hardware. The report details how, through foreign aid and training, Costa Rica's police forces developed some pretty significant military capabilities. We're talking about an air wing, a coast guard with armed patrol boats, and even special police units trained in infantry tactics. So what this shows us is that even when a country formally gets rid of its army, geopolitical pressures can lead to a militarization of its other security forces. The name changes, but some of the functions and the hardware can look very, very similar. The Costa Rican example shows that the choice to demilitarize can be really complex. But this leads to an even deeper question. Is that choice always voluntary? And what happens when it isn't? So far, we've talked about demilitarization as a choice, but what if it's not? Sometimes it's a condition that's imposed by outside powers. An analysis in the International Law blog explores this very dilemma, looking at proposals for a potential Palestinian state. The author argues that making demilitarization a prerequisite for statehood creates a fundamental legal conflict. It clashes with Article 51 of the UN Charter, which recognizes a state's inherent right to self-defense. Now, to understand why this is such a conflict, we need a quick dive into international law. The declaratory theory of statehood basically says a country is a country if it meets the basic criteria, like having a population and a government. Other countries don't get to grant it existence. They just recognize a reality that's already there. And that creates this core tension. On one hand, you have external powers demanding demilitarization as a condition for recognition. On the other hand, you have the idea that every state has inherent rights, like the right to self-defense. And the argument is, you can't make a fundamental right conditional without kind of breaking the whole system of international law. So, we've journeyed from the immense economic cost of armies to the ideal of nations without them and into the complex legal and political realities that challenge that ideal. This brings all the threads together into one final crucial question. So we're left with the ultimate question of opportunity cost. What truly makes a nation secure? Is it the power to win a war, or is it the creation of a society so healthy, so educated, and so stable that there is no war to fight? As we've seen, there are no easy answers, only the constant, critical choice of how we pay the price for peace.
If you enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any episode. Your support means the world to us.